That's why. Schedule 14, now the member from Timiskaming Cochrane spoke very passionately about that. This is the English and Wabigoon Rivers Remediation Funding Act of 2017. This is the Grassy Narrows issue, Speaker. Of course, this one defies all credibility that the Liberals and the Premier did not know about this. This is what they stand up and say every day. They've been in power for 14 years. For 10 years, people have been talking about this. We didn't know about that. So it's important that this get dealt with. Don't get us wrong, Speaker. We fully support Schedule 14, but we're not going to support the fall economic statement, Speaker, any of the numbers in them, because they're made up. So with that in mind, I'm going to break for a moment, Speaker, and just read a letter that I issued today. And the letter says, the Ontario PC caucus is extremely disappointed with this government's decision to introduce yet another omnibus bill, Bill 177, in a bid to ram through unrelated legislation without proper debate and consideration in the legislature in order to score cheap political points against their opponents. This is the same cynical approach the government has taken with Bill 174 just this week and last week, dealing with cannabis sales, where unrelated legislation affecting e-cigarettes and school bus cameras was inexplicably attached to the cannabis-specific schedules of the bill. Let me be clear. Many of the schedules contained in Bill 177 have the full support of our caucus. For example, we completely favour Schedule 43, which would establish a French-language university in Ontario, something our leader Patrick Brown led the charge on, Speaker. We also support the recommendations Schedule 2, 30 and 34, as I mentioned, that stem from the inquiry into the Elliott Lake Mall collapse that will improve safety in Ontario. As a matter of fact, Speaker, Schedule 3, which deals with exceptions for childcare providers, is based on an amendment the Ontario PC caucus proposed at committee. So Bill 177 is a 168-page, 46-schedule omnibus bill introduced by the Finance Minister, which, ironically enough, has very little to do with the fall economic statement. The Premier would do well to follow the lead of her federal counterparts who changed parliamentary standing orders to prevent the use of omnibus bills that include a wide range of unrelated matters. In fact, earlier this month, the Liberal Speaker of the House of Commons ruled that 4 aspects of the federal budget bill, Bill C-63, were not part of the budget and needed to be introduced as separate bills. They would be wise to follow the lead set by their federal cousins. The Ontario PC caucus is requesting that the aforementioned schedules of Bill 177, as well as other non-fall economic statement schedules, be removed and introduced in the legislature as separate pieces of legislation. They deserve to be considered on their own merit. We will further push for amendments where necessary to the finance-specific schedules of the bill to try to improve this legislation. But we cannot support the financial direction of a government who has allowed debt to spiral out of control beyond $300 billion. So, Speaker, on that point, I would seek unanimous consent to put forward a motion without notice to split Bill 177. I have tabled this motion.
The member from Nipissing is seeking unanimous consent to put forward a bill straightforward. Yes. Do we agree? I heard a no. Continue.
Thank you, Speaker. That's disappointing, so I will continue to talk about what the Schedule 14, the Grassy Narrows, as I mentioned, very supportive of that. This government should have been taking care of that earlier. Schedule 15 is the Family Law Act, Speaker. In that particular bill, this is an amendment that would permit a person over 18 to be able to obtain child support from a parent in circumstances where the person is unable to withdraw from parental control. And I can go on and on. Speaker, again, it's in the middle of the fall economic statement. Important bills. These are all important bills. But, Speaker, unrelated to the finances. Schedule 16 is Financial Services Regulatory Authority. We call it FSRA. FSRA of Ontario. So these are amendments, and this is truly an important component of a fall economic statement. Schedule 17, Financial Services Tribunal. This continues with some consequential amendments, but important. Schedule 18, also one of my favorites in here, called the Green Energy Act of 2009. Again, it's in the fall economic statement. This, Speaker, erodes the OEB independence. And, you know, there's no more charade going on that these bodies are independent. They co-opted, the Liberal Party co-opted all of these energy organizations into approving their so-called fair hydro plan and that scheme to pay for it. They're all co-opted into doing that. They're all under the thumb of the Premier and the Liberal Party. You do this or else. They live in a culture of fear. That's what this government has created, Speaker, a culture of fear. So here we've got amendments to the Green Energy Act, and that brings us to the very story that's been in the national media about the harm of this Green Energy Act, which is in here. So, you know, to the ministers, again, I'm going to talk about green energy because you put it in the fall economic statement. I'm allowed to do that, and I expect to. Just yesterday, actually it was yesterday, it was brought out today, it's in today's media, the headline is Ontarians subsidizing Michigan, New York Hydro. I mean, that is something we've talked about here. I was elected in 2011, and Speaker, the then Auditor General in November of 2011 held a news conference with a special report on the state of hydro. It's so shocking a report, but so revealing. Everything that Auditor General told us, first of all, is now proven to have been true, but all the forecasting that he did for the next 6 years, he had numbers, and I'm talking numbers in the billions, and he was bang on every one of his numbers. You know, when the Green Energy Act was first put out, he came out only 2 years later and said, hang on a second, this is going to cost Ontario families billions, and here's why. He told us that there was no business plan done. They just rushed into it. It was ready, fire, aim. They jumped into something they knew nothing about. The law of unintended consequences didn't occur to them because, for the most part, there's no business people involved in crafting this thing to be able to tell them whether it was a good business deal or not, whether the numbers would work or not, or whether it would hurt families and force energy poverty in Ontario and make families choose between whether to heat or eat. So he was right back in 2011. I was there in the room. I was there in the media studio the day he discussed this. I was energy critic at the time. He told us how much money we're going to lose every year exporting surplus wind and solar power. He told us that. Ontario lost, this is now in the news today, Ontario lost between $732 million and $1.25 billion over the past 2 years selling surplus clean energy, clean electricity outside the province. That's the sad reality of what this government has created. So here in their fall economic statement, they open the door to talk about the Green Energy Act, and I know many of us in our speeches over the course of discussing Bill 177 will want to highlight on the Green Energy Act because they've opened the door. They've opened the door to the pain and suffering that they have caused Ontario families through their misguided direction on green energy when Ontario had the cleanest, greenest, most reliable and most affordable energy in water power. Created more than 100 years ago by Sir Adam Beck, we had it made. When this government took office, we were amongst the lowest energy rates in North America. Today, we're amongst the highest. That's what they've done. So when you think of all the companies that continue to leave Ontario, and the stories are numerous, all the companies that expand in the States buying cheap power. I talked just yesterday about the greenhouse chap that we had met when I was energy critic, and he was telling me that he wanted to double the size of his greenhouse operation. I had no idea the magnitude of that. I toured it. It was monstrous. I'm thinking, this is a lot of millions and millions and multi-tens of millions here. And I'm trying to do the math in my head, and it's a pretty big number, and he's talking about doubling the size down around the Chatham-Kent-Essex riding. And this is back in 2011 and 12, but he could not get a fair energy price. And, Speaker, I ran into him here at the Vegetable Growers Lobby Day, and I said to him, Peter, did you ever build your greenhouse expansion that you talked about? And he said, Vic, I want you to know we spent $100 million building a twin of our operation, except we did it in Ohio. Now, you can imagine, we're paying Ohio every night to take our surplus power, and they eat our lunch and take our businesses away, put them in Ohio, and that's where they invested $100 million to build a new greenhouse. And he said, do you remember my friend Terry? I think that was his name. I said, yeah, I remember him. We also visited his greenhouse. He said, yeah, well, he built an $85 million facility, greenhouse facility, but he did his in Pennsylvania, Speaker. He built his in Pennsylvania, where energy was cheap. And again, we pay Pennsylvania to take our surplus power.
If people want to have a discussion, you don't want to yell across 7 chairs. You might want to go outside and talk about it. The member from Trinity Spadina. Thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Speaker. I know they don't want to hear about this, Speaker, because these are Ontario families' lives that have been irreparably harmed and have changed, Speaker. I understand that. I can understand, Speaker, they don't want to hear. The fact that Google announced their first ever Canadian data center operation. And where is it going? Quebec. Why? Google said they can't afford the energy in Ontario. That's amazing. You take Amazon. Now, I'm not talking about Amazon's new headquarters, Speaker. I'm talking about Amazon also built the first ever data center in Canada, and they built it in Quebec as well. And again, their number one reason, highest energy rates in North America are here in Ontario, and they couldn't afford to build here. You know, when you've got Sergio Marchi, the CEO and chair of Fiat Chrysler, telling the Premier of Ontario, you have created the most expensive jurisdiction in North America in which to do business. You know, I hear the member from Barrie moaning. I'd moan too if I were the Premier and heard that she's ruined the province of Ontario and created the most expensive jurisdiction. I understand how that can bother them, Speaker. They should have known when they put the Green Energy Act in their bill that they're going to have to listen to people talk about how the Green Energy Act has ruined the province of Ontario. They also put high occupancy toll lanes in the bill. I remember, Speaker, during the gas plant scandal when the government had to turn over documents, and remember they told the Speaker with 36,000 documents, you have them all. 30 MPPs stood up, 12 cabinet ministers all stood here and said, you have them all. Turned into be 36,000 more documents were turned over, or 20,000 more documents turned over in 2 weeks. Well, in those documents, we found their, quote, revenue tools. That was, and high occupancy toll lanes were one of those revenue tools. You know, it's not enough, Speaker, that they've increased fees. Your vehicle registration and driver's license fees have increased $503 million in 4 years. It's not enough that that money grab has to happen. There's a war on the car, Speaker, from Kathleen Wynne and her party. It's people are no longer drivers, Speaker.
Well, we're rather rambunctious today, aren't we? The member from Barrie and Trinity Spadina. Well, you don't want the old Speaker to take it up a notch, do you? No, I didn't think so. Continue.
Thank you. So, Speaker, people are no longer drivers in Ontario. They are revenue tools. We've learned that now. But from the beginning, the Wynne Liberal plan has been a thinly veiled scheme that was a lot more about digging into our wallets than about easing congestion or emissions. In fact, they've had to pull back on permits. The fact that they had to pull back on permits proves without a doubt that this was a half-baked plan from the start, an exercise which, rather than reducing, may actually be building further gridlock and congestion. So that genius plan is in there. So instead of easing congestion, Speaker, they have a pretty good opportunity here to see more. Schedule 20 is the Indigenous Institutes Act. Very important bill. Again, this provides for the role of a ministry-recognized council. This is about post-secondary Indigenous schools, Speaker. Strong issue. What on earth is it doing in a fall economic statement? We'll never know. Schedule 21 is the Insurance Act. Again, there's consequential complementary amendments. Schedule 22, interim appropriation. Now, that is a supply bill. That's actually pure finance. Thank you. Schedule 23, a Land Transfer Tax Act. Schedule 24, liquor control. Again, this is to do with the wine content and labeling. It's some technical amendments. Schedule 25, the Mining Tax Act. This is all about using foreign currency when operating in another country. You can imagine how that should or shouldn't be in here. Ministry of Revenue Act. This is another finance section. Schedule 27. Mortgage brokers, lenders, consequential amendments are made there. Schedule 28, the Municipal Act. Schedule 29, the Municipal Property Assessment Act. Schedule 30 is, again, yet another Elliott Lake Act. It supports the intent of the recommendations in the report of the Elliott Lake Commission of Inquiry. It's an important piece. Schedule 31, they opened the door again, the Ontario Energy Board Act. You know, I've already talked about how the Liberals have co-opted the OPG and others, partners, into this tangled web they have for their so-called fair hydro plan. The Auditor General was very explicit about that. Schedule 32 is the Ontario Labour Mobility Act. It changes, amends the name of the to the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development, formerly training colleges and universities. Schedule 23 is the Pension Benefit Act. And I can tell you, Speaker, there's a letter that I'll read a small portion of into the record. It's from the Canadian Federation of Pensioners. The increase, they're saying these pensioners will be even worse off than they are today because plan underfunding will be more common and more harmful due to the reduction in the solvency funding target to 85% from 100%. The 85% funding target is not in Bill 177. It will eventually be made explicit in the regulations. What they're saying is they're hopeful that their persistence on the unnecessary harm caused by this will ultimately prove persuasive to the government. They're trying desperately to fight this, Speaker. Schedule 34, more on Elliott Lake. Schedule 36, Provincial Offences Act. It's important, but has nothing to do with the fall economic statement. Schedule 36 and 37 refer to insurance and securities. 38 is Persons with Developmental Disabilities Act. It hasn't been proclaimed, and it needs to be. So you can see, Speaker, that what I'm saying as this goes on and on and on, that these schedules, many of the schedules, we support. We support these, Speaker. In fact, at least one we even proposed. But, Speaker, we cannot support the financial direction of the government with their wrong and misleading accounting.
A nice finale.